Of the show for today. We're talking to Minister Gregory Taylor and the Reverend Dr. Amos Jones in reference to the restoration of the original hymns and spirituals in the African American church. And Dr. Jones, let's start with you by having you to talk about an individual that we often point to as one of the leaders in the old African American church dealing with spirituals and hymns. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Dr. Haney, Dr. J. Robert Bradley is one of the stellar figures in this area of music, spirituals and hymns and anthems in the African American church. He grew up, he was born in Memphis, Tennessee, born in a section of Memphis called Pinch. and it indicates the kind of condition that he lived in. But he was a kind of a precocious person. He had innate musical ability. And he was discovered by Miss Lucy Campbell during, he was one of her students in school, and she knew he could sing, but during one of the sessions in the National Baptist Convention, he wandered up onto the stage at, I believe it was Ellis Auditorium, and eventually sang a song with no shoes and coming up out of the Wolf River, having been fishing down there. But he captivated the audience, that National Baptist audience, and from that time on, he became really the voice of National Baptist Convention, singing hymns and anthems and Negro spirituals. He came, because of his connection with the convention, they brought him here to Nashville to work with the BTU, I believe it was called. It first started as BYPU, but then he came, and he was a part of a group that went across Tennessee, he and Thomas Shelby, singing hymns and anthems and revivals. And he was discovered by Mr. Charles Bryan over in McMinnville, Tennessee, who was, he was a Caucasian professor at Tennessee Tech, I believe it was. And he had Mr. Bradley to go to school over here at Peabody, where he studied and then went on to sing in New York, in Carnegie Hall, and then he went on to sing at Royal Albert Hall in London, singing nothing but Negro spirituals and anthems and those, Amazing Grace, and all those kinds of songs. It was in a time when the music of the early Gospels was taking hold. Roberta Martin, Thomas Dorsey, and those kinds of personalities. He knew all of them. He sang and lived with Mahalia Jackson. So he really represented the kind of music that we're talking about, anthems, spirituals, Negro spirituals, and hymns. He was really the voice of hymnody. And if we really wanted to, even now, hear good, solid hymns, church hymn music, J. Rob Bradley is the one. Even though he's gone on to glory, he's the one that represents that era.
You know, Brother Taylor, I think that you've mentioned the significance of what you're trying to do. Now, why don't you explain that to our audience this morning? Why are you so concerned in reference to going back to these hymnals, and what does that mean for the church today?
Yes. When I first came to Nashville in June 2007, I was disturbed to discover that a lot of the devotion had been replaced with the praise teams in church. And so I got in touch with the newspaper, and this is where I started to write about my memory of the old songs in Alabama, because we were taught to always stay near the church where the old hymns are sung. And when I was living in Atlanta, I would even use the telephone to call back home to get the devotion by telephone. Then I would get the phone in the sermon in the city. But it was just to know that they were our anchor. I feel like today the church music is drifting, and there is no anchorage to the church because of how it's changing. And I think about what Mahalia Jackson said about Dr. J. Robert Bradley, that his voice was the greatest voice she ever heard, and he was a favorite singer of Dr. MLK Jr. And so to get that kind of testimony from those two individuals, the greatest voice of singer, Mahalia Jackson, and the greatest speaking voice of Dr. MLK Jr., you know, to me that just points to something there that was in him that's needed today in order to help get our music back on course, and particularly in the area of the devotion. And I have recently had the opportunity to meet a gentleman from Vancouver, Canada, who's also in love with the devotion of the church and did his thesis in the devotion in University of Memphis. And he is quite interested in that particular area and constantly questioned me, why is it that the African American doesn't have an interest in the richest part of their heritage anymore? So I believe that through Dr. Bradley's voice, I see him as the MLK of devotion music, church worship music, you know.
Dr. Jones, do you think that if we were able to, in a real sense, return back to this kind of worship service, which is to say that we might eliminate all the saxophones and all of the other things in reference to the church, do you think that our young people would, this would appeal to our young people? Because I think that this is always one of the things that is said in reference to it, that our young people would not go for that kind of music. Do you think that that would make an appeal to them over the last minute and a half that we have?
We could only hope that that happens because what this music represents is soul, a feeling. And that because when Dr. Bradley would sing, you'd feel his very soul. You don't get that with the contemporary music that is in the church today. You just don't get the feeling, the soul. It's more of a beat, a rhythm. And you would hope that conditions would turn us back to the feeling, the soul of the music that I've remembered in my youth.
And so in a real sense, the things that we're trying to accomplish here today to make this music, make an awareness of this music, you think that this is a worthy project in which both the two of you are engaged in. Would you say that?
Oh, I would, definitely. Because I think we have commercialized music, gospel music. Our young folks are looking to be discovered, to get a recording contract of some sort. And so it's not the soul, the depth of the feeling.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Jones, let me interrupt you here for this second commercial break, after which we'll give you an opportunity to elaborate upon that idea. Okay. We'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.